February 1945. The German town of Goch lay scarred and smoking. The rain turned the roads to rivers of mud. From the shattered tree line, a silhouette emerged, slow, heavy, and unstoppable. A Churchill tank, caked in dirt, crawled forward under enemy fire. Each shell that struck its armor echoed like thunder, but it did not stop. Inside, the crew, tired, soaked, but unbroken, pressed on toward the town's burning edge. This was no ordinary tank. It was Britain's steel bulldog, the Churchill, a machine that refused to die, built in desperation, ridiculed by its enemies, and doubted by its own creators. The Churchill would rise from failure to become one of the most enduring symbols of British resolve. As the war dragged toward its bloody end, this slow, outdated tank found itself in some of the fiercest battles of World War II, from the beaches of Dieppe to the sands of El Alamein, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the muddy streets of Goch. Everywhere it went, soldiers learned one thing: the Churchill might not be the fastest, but it never quit. This is the story of a tank that outlasted its critics, outfought its enemies, and earned the respect of all who saw it rumble into battle. The story of the Churchill. Before the Churchill became a legend, it was almost a disaster. In the early days of World War II, the British Army faced a harsh truth: their tanks were outmatched. France had fallen, and much of Britain's armor lay abandoned on foreign soil. The country needed a new tank, one that could stand its ground, move with the infantry, and survive the hell of German firepower. From this desperation came the idea for a new kind of armored giant, the infantry tank Mark IV, later named Churchill, after the man leading Britain through its darkest hour. But the road to creation was anything but smooth. The first design, known as the A-20, was meant to crawl across trenches and craters like the monsters of World War I. It was heavily armored, but painfully slow, barely reaching 10 miles per hour. Trials revealed constant breakdowns, faulty transmissions, and weapons that simply didn't fit. Yet time was running out. Britain expected invasion at any moment, and Prime Minister Winston Churchill ordered the tanks to be built immediately, even if testing wasn't finished. Engineers worked around the clock, assembling metal under blackout lights as air raid sirens howled over British cities. When the first model rolled out in 1941, soldiers saw a strange, lumbering beast, long tracks wrapping around its hull, thick armor like a steel fortress. It was imperfect, unreliable, but it was British, and soon it would earn its place in history. August 19th, 1942. The grey dawn over the French coast broke with thunder. Operation Jubilee, the Dieppe raid, was underway. It would become one of the most tragic and revealing battles of the war, and for the Churchill tank, its first taste of combat. As Canadian troops of the Calgary Regiment approached the beach, their Churchills rumbled inside the landing craft, engines growling over the crash of waves. Modified for the assault, some carried flamethrowers while others were equipped with canvas carpets to roll over the slippery stones. When the ramps dropped, chaos erupted. 2 tanks drowned before reaching shore, swallowed by the sea. The rest crawled onto the beach, immediately bogging down in the loose shingle. The small round stones jammed into their tracks, snapping them apart as machine gun fire poured down from the cliffs. Engineers tried to clear obstacles, but the beach was a furnace of smoke and blood. Only 15 Churchills made it over the seawall. They fought through the narrow streets, crushing bunkers, silencing guns, and even knocking down entire buildings to dislodge defenders. But without infantry support, they were trapped fighting alone in a doomed raid. By midday, the order to withdraw was given. None of the tanks were recovered, and only 1 man from the Calgary Regiment's tank crews made it back to England. Yet even in defeat, the Churchill revealed its strength. Out of 29 tanks, only 2 were penetrated by German anti-tank shells. A German report mocked it as obsolete and clumsy, but behind those words was fear. The Churchill had survived where most machines would have been torn apart. It had proven, even in failure, that it was built to endure. October 1942. The deserts of Egypt shimmered with heat and dust as the British Eighth Army prepared for one of the war's most decisive clashes, the Second Battle of El Alamein. Among the units waiting for orders stood 6 Churchill Mark III tanks under the command of Major Norris King. They were part of a small experimental unit called King Force, sent to see whether the heavy British tank could survive the unforgiving desert and the fury of Rommel's guns. When the attack began, King Force advanced into a storm of fire. German 88mm cannons cracked across the dunes, slicing the air with lightning and steel. The Churchills lumbered forward slow but relentless. Shells slammed into their armor, sparks leaping off the thick steel hulls. One tank was hit 38 times by German 50 and 75mm shells. Another took 6 direct hits. Still, most of them fought on. Inside, the crews worked in suffocating heat, blinded by smoke and deafened by explosions. Each man knew that one lucky shot could turn their steel shelter into a tomb, but the Churchill held. Major King's own tank took 8 hits and remained operational, knocking out 4 German panzers before the guns finally fell silent. When the battle ended, even the skeptical commanders had to admit the Churchill was a survivor. It might not have been fast, but it was tough as iron and trusted by the men inside it. In a desert where machines broke under the sun and men lost hope, the Churchill tank earned its reputation as the bulldog of the battlefield, scarred, battered, and still standing. By 1943, the Churchill had proven its courage in battle, but its gun was falling behind. The German tanks it faced were getting stronger, faster, and deadlier. The Churchill's 6-pounder cannon, once effective, now lacked the power and range to deal with modern armor. Crews often joked that they could bounce shells off enemy tanks and only make the Germans angry. But one British officer decided to change that with nothing more than scrap metal and ingenuity. In the dusty workshops of North Africa, Captain Percy Morrell of the 665th Tank Troops Workshop examined rows of damaged tanks awaiting disposal. Among them were Sherman's American-built, equipped with the far superior 75mm gun. Morrell studied the mounts, measured the fittings, and had a wild idea. What if that gun could fit into a Churchill turret? It was a dangerous gamble. If the experiment failed, he'd ruin a perfectly good tank and his career with it. But he went ahead anyway. With a small team of engineers, he worked through the night, cutting, welding, and adapting parts by hand under flickering lamplight. When they were done, they fired the first test round. The recoil slammed through the tank, dust filled the air, and the gun worked perfectly. The success spread quickly through the ranks. Over 200 Churchills were converted to mount the new 75mm weapon, designated Churchill NA-75NA for North Africa. The upgrade transformed the tank from a slow bruiser into a true battlefield threat. Captain Morrell was promoted to Major. His invention wasn't born from a factory, but from the battlefield itself, proof that even in war, courage isn't always shown with a gun. Sometimes, it's shown with an idea. By 1944, the Churchill had evolved far beyond its troubled beginnings. What began as a desperate design had become one of Britain's most trusted war machines. But now, it faced its greatest test, the D-Day landings. To storm Hitler's Atlantic Wall, the Allies needed more than bravery. They needed creativity. That's where one man stepped in. Major General Sir Percy Hobart, a brilliant, eccentric commander who believed tanks could do much more than just fight. Under Hobart's command, the 79th Armoured Division began building a family of specialized Churchill tanks machines, so unique they were nicknamed Hobart's Funnies. There were AVREs, armoured vehicles of the Royal Engineers, equipped with massive 290mm petard mortars that could hurl 40-pound explosives into bunkers. Others carried bridges on their backs, laid carpet rolls across sand, or dropped wooden fascines into ditches to make paths for following vehicles. And then came the Churchill Crocodile, a flamethrower tank towing an armored trailer filled with fuel capable of spewing fire over 100 yards. On June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy erupted in chaos. Waves crashed, smoke rose, and the first Churchill of the 79th Armoured Division crawled ashore under heavy fire. The AVRE's shattered concrete defences, their petard shells exploding like thunder against German walls. The crocodiles followed, belching flame that turned enemy strongpoints into silence. Soldiers who once feared the beaches found courage watching those slow, fearless tanks press forward through smoke and fire. To many on the sand that day, the Churchill was more than steel, it was salvation. Its thick armor shielded the engineers who built the roads, cleared the mines, and opened the way inland. The success of the landings owed much to those strange, stubborn machines. And when the tide of battle turned, so too did the reputation of Churchill, no longer a flawed design, but a hero of D-Day. By early 1945, the war in Europe was nearing its end, but the fighting was far from over. Germany's western defences still clawed back with desperation. In February, the British Army pushed into the dense, rain-soaked Reichswald forest, where mud, mines, and machine guns turned every advance into agony. At the heart of that push were the Churchill tanks, slow, hulking, and unyielding, leading men through hell toward the town of Goch. The 107th Regiment Royal Armoured Corps and units of the 79th Armoured Division fought there for weeks, their tanks grinding forward over cratered roads. Rain turned the fields into swamps, engines choked in mud. But the Churchills kept moving, their thick armour shrugging off the fire of desperate German defenders. The British developed a grimly efficient method to root out the last pockets of resistance. First, gun-armed Churchills blasted the bunkers with 75mm or 95mm shells. If the defenders still refused to yield, engineer Churchills, the AVREs, rolled forward, firing their massive petard mortars, each round carrying 40 pounds of high explosive. The blast tore open concrete and steel, shaking the ground itself. And if even that failed, the crocodiles came. Their flamethrowers hissed, releasing streams of fire that crawled across the earth and into the pillboxes. Flames filled the night sky, and most of the time, the Germans surrendered before the second burst. Through this grim sequence, Goch fell on February 20th, 1945. The town was rubble, but the advance did not stop. Months later, another Churchill formation, the 107th Royal Tank Regiment, was combined with infantry, engineers, and artillery to form Clark Force, led by Brigadier W.S. Clark. Their mission: spearhead the advance toward the Scheldt estuary, to open the port of Antwerp and secure the Allied supply line. For 10 brutal days, Clark Force battled through woods, flooded fields, and hidden gun positions. They fought assault guns and infantry at close range, often face-to-face in the mud. When it was over, they had destroyed 13 enemy assault guns and captured over 230 prisoners for the loss of 11 Churchills. The report read like simple numbers, but behind them lay exhaustion, courage, and the quiet pride of crews who knew they had carried Britain one step closer to victory. By the time the guns fell silent, the Churchill had done more than survive the war, it had helped end it. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the world began to count the cost and the lessons of 6 years of war. Among the wreckage stood the Churchill Tank, battered, scarred, and slow yet unbroken. It had fought across deserts, beaches, forests, and city streets. It had carried engineers, infantry, and hope through some of the darkest hours of the century. More than 5,600 Churchills had been built. Many were scrapped after victory, their steel melted down for peacetime industry. But others served on in training units, in the British occupation forces in Germany, and later in the bitter cold hills of Korea. The Australian Army kept theirs in service until 1956. Even the Irish Free State received a few, one of which remained in working order into the 1970s. Its gun could still fire, until the day ammunition for it no longer existed. Today, some Churchills still stand in museums. Their armor pitted and rusted, but proud a reminder of a machine that was never perfect, yet never stopped. Soldiers who rode in them often said the same thing. She wasn't fast, but she'd always bring you home. And perhaps that was the greatest thing a tank could do. The Churchill tank embodied the spirit of its namesake, stubborn in the face of adversity, unwilling to bow, and steady when others faltered. It began as a failure, became a workhorse, and ended as a legend. In every campaign it fought, the Churchill proved that true strength isn't measured in speed or firepower, but in resilience. It moved forward through mud, fire, and fear, and in doing so, carried an army toward victory. The Churchill was more than steel and bolts. It was a symbol of determination, of courage under pressure, and of a nation that refused to give up. Its tracks have long gone silent, but its legacy still echoes through history, the heartbeat of Britain's armored soul. It was slow, it was flawed, but it was unstoppable, just like the men who drove it.